Greetings, I'm Ted Simpson, and welcome to this demonstration of Activity 3-2, in which I will be creating a new virtual machine for Windows Server 2016. In addition to creating the virtual machine, I also want to show you how to modify the default virtual machine settings, as well as boot to the virtual machine's BIOS setup menu. Okay, let's get started. To start with, we've already launched Workstation 12, in this case Pro. You may have a later version, but it will work about the same. And down to step 4 in the lab, I'm going to check my default document path for where the virtual machines will be stored. Notice it's putting them on the OneDrive, and I don't want that. I created a directory, as described earlier, in my C drive for virtual machines, and that's where I want to store my virtual machines. So after changing my default directory, we'll click OK. Now we're going to create a new virtual machine from step 5. And we'll get a new virtual machine wizard that comes up. We're going to do the custom option here in step 6. Click next. Then in step 7, under hardware compatibility, notice that we have Workstation 12 showing right now. If you go to an earlier Workstation version like 6, you can really see some of the differences in terms of what limitations it has. For example, 8 gigabytes of memory, where if we go to 12, we're 64 gigabytes of memory. So we want to choose the latest version that our software will support. So now we'll click next. And in the guest operating system installation, which is step 8, we're going to click that I will install the operating system later. And then we'll hit next. It's going to be a Windows operating system, and it's already showing Windows Server 2016 here. So I'm okay to proceed to step 10 and record the default information. And we'll click next. And our virtual machine name, we'll leave the default name at this time. And our location, we've already identified. Click next. Brings us to step 11 then, where we have our firmware, and in step 11 it says to choose the EFI firmware, and then click next. To see our processor configuration, in step 12, processor configuration, we're going to verify one processor selected, and then click next. To bring up our memory configuration. Here you could change memory depending on what your requirements are. Right now it says the memory for this virtual machine is going to be 1 gigabyte. We can change this at a later date as described in step 11. So we'll, in this case, let's change it to 2 gigabytes. And then click next. And in the network type window under step 14, we're going to use network address translation, or NAT. So that's already selected. So then we can click next. And we can record here the I/O controller type, but it's going to leave it at the LSI controller type. And then we're going to take a look at our drive. In a disk type drive, again, we're going to leave the default of SCSI. This is what the drive type will appear to the software, even though it doesn't matter what drive type my actual computer is using. The physical hardware is separate here from the virtual machine, which is going to be a hyper-converged definition. We're going to create a new virtual disk. And then that brings down to step 18, at disk capacity. We're going to enter 120 in here. It'll only use what it needs because we're going to, notice it says we don't have a check and allocate disk space now, so it will dynamically assign it. But I'm going to store it as a single file to make it easier for me to manage this virtual machine. And then we're going to click Next. And in the disk name, we're going to leave the name as the default name. And then we'll click Next. Now we see a summary window comes up. We verify our selections and click Finish. And that will create our virtual machine. Now to test this virtual machine, we're going to try powering it on to our firmware. So under step 21 it says to boot your new virtual machine into the firmware. We're going to click the VM menu up here. And then underneath the power option, we're going to say power on to firmware. And it gives us a little keyboard message there. And again, with these removable devices, we can just click OK. And in a couple minutes here, we'll see the boot manager menu come up. Now we can click anywhere in here to turn control over to our virtual machine, as shown in step 22. And then we can press the down arrow to move our menu selections down. And let's say Enter Setup. We'll go down to Enter Setup, it says, under step 22, and press Enter. It says that we're going to start by configuring our boot options. So let's click Configure Boot Options by pressing Enter, as shown in step 23. So we want to change the boot order, so let's go down to Change Boot Order, as it says there in step 23. And we can press Enter, and then we can set which device the system will attempt to boot to. So we can change the boot order here by moving the boot devices up and down. We'll be taking a look at doing that in our next activity. Now we'll press the Escape key for now a few times. And at this point now we can shut down the system and return back to our VMware Workstation window. So in our next activity, we'll try to install Windows 2016 Server into this virtual machine. In summary, in this activity, we performed the following steps. First, we viewed the VMware Workstation properties and changed the default VM location. Secondly, we created a new virtual machine for Windows Server 2016. And finally, we booted this new virtual machine to the BIOS setup menu. In later activities, we'll be using this virtual machine for a variety of purposes.